Anyway, welcome everyone. I'm so pleased you could join us today for the 106th birthday of the School of Information under its various guises and names over the years. One important housekeeping item before we get started. This lecture is being streamed and recorded for online audiences. Live audience members, if you note that any question or comment you make during the Q&A sessions can be streamed and recorded and made available to the public, so just keep that in mind if you're going to bring up anything highly controversial, you should be aware of that. So, my name is Eric Meyer. I'm the Dean of the School of Information here, and I have been for about 7 weeks now. I started on August 1st. So I came here in August from the University of Texas at Austin, where I was the Dean of the School of Information for 6 years. And before that, I was a professor at Oxford University. So before starting today's talks, since this is a birthday celebration for the school, it was suggested that I give a brief recounting of some key points in the history of the school, which would be appropriate. Some of you in this room will know aspects of the history far better than a recent transplant like me. So I look forward to having you fill in some of the gaps in my own knowledge during our discussion at today's reception, which will immediately follow today's talks. It'll help me learn more about the long history and storied past of the information and libraries here at Berkeley. I'll mention it again later, but we had a lovely lunch today with some of the people here in this room, alumni of the program. And it was really rewarding for me to start to understand the history of the school and all the impact that it's had on people's lives over the years. So the school began in 1918, which is 106 years ago, for those doing the math, as a full-time program in library science. It was a timely initiative as there was an urgent and growing societal need, and this idea of a societal need comes back up again, time and time again, for skilled librarians in the relatively new and definitely growing state of California. Responding to changing opportunities and needs of societies is really a defining feature of the iSchool till today. The program became a department in the College of Letters and Sciences, and in 1926 became the Graduate School of Librarianship. In 1954, doctoral degrees were added to promote research and to meet the growing need for faculty in related schools elsewhere. In the 60s and 70s, the school strengthened its faculty and broadened its offerings, again in response to societal needs and the emergence of computerized information technologies. Again, some of you that I was talking to at lunch were talking about their own engagement with computerization of libraries in the 60s and 70s and the impact that they had based on their time here and then their careers. In 1974, a graduate council committee report proposed a broader vision of information science, including computer networks, digital information processing, and networked information. The school was renamed the School of Library and Information Studies, SLIS, 2 years later. In the 1990s, the school again broadened its scope and was renamed the School of Information Management Systems. You might be picking up on the theme here is that not only is the name changing, but it's a nimble kind of school that can respond to changing needs in society and changing things in the world around us. Master's and Ph.D. degrees in information management systems were approved soon after that. The name was eventually shortened to the current name of the School of Information in 2006. Now, I've mentioned the lunch today. This is a perfect time to acknowledge just a few of the notable alumni who represent the history of the school and are some of whom are the people I'm going to mention here today. At this lunch of alumni, so again, some of you who were there, we went around the table and people were talking about some of their history and background and the things that they were able to achieve. So among today's guests includes not one, but two former ALA presidents. First is Mitch Friedman. Mitch graduated with an MLS in 1965 when I understand the school was located in the rafters of the Doe Library. Is that right?
Nice.
Wonderful place I hear.
Each had a desk.
So Mitch became a vital activist for intellectual freedom, socially responsible cataloging, and is a former president of the American Library Association from 1977 to 78. Is that correct?
No.
No. What year was it?
I think it was 2000, 2001.
2001. Okay, so we got to update our
Something like that.
Wikipedia needs updated. Mitch made his trip.
Is correct.
Mitch made his trip here from all the way up from Rhode Island, and I'm pleased you could be here today. So thank you, Mitch.
Right.
Second is Patty Wong, who was the first Asian American ALA president in 2021, 2022, and earned an MLS degree from our school in 1984. Is that right? She has a distinguished career, including a current role as city librarian for Santa Clara and teaching at San Jose State. Among her accolades are her reward for 2009, this State Senate District Woman of the Year for her dedication to improving library access, and the ALA Equality Award in 2012. Another notable alum joining us is Steve Silverstein. Let's sit over here. who received his MLS in 1977. Steve was responsible for the automation and digitization of library systems on a global scale. After graduating, he was a programmer for the UC Berkeley libraries and went on to co-found a company called Innovative Interfaces. The company revolutionized libraries by developing automated systems that were installed in 9,500 or more libraries in 66 countries. He's also on the board of trustees of the UC Berkeley Foundation. And we're honored to have you here today, Steve. And I also want to acknowledge one of our truly outstanding academic alumni, Marcia Bates. So Marcia Bates is a professor emeritus at UCLA and earned an MLS in 1967 and a Ph.D. in 1972 from Berkeley. For those of us in the academic world, Marcia is a well-known and extremely highly cited figure, and she led the monumental task of serving as editor-in-chief of the 7-volume Encyclopedia of Library and Information Sciences, and that was published in 2009, is that correct? So, and 7 volumes, even just, if you don't know the book, knowing that it's 7 volumes shows the scope and scale of that work that she led. So I could go on listing notable alumni, but this gives you just a tiny taste of the impact that the school here has had on both the research and practice of information professions over the last 106 years. The School of Information continues to evolve and to adapt and meet the changing and pressing needs of society. In 2013, we added the groundbreaking online Masters of Information and Data Science, which is still the top-ranked program of its kind in the country. Fortune magazine just came out with their rankings a week or two ago, and we're #1. And one of the things that I want to mention about that is in online education space, there's a strong tendency of many online programs to put materials online and then just leave people to their own devices and hope for the best. That's not true of the way we run our online programs. We have a very high-touch program, and one of the measures of that is that the completion rate is 89% for our Masters of Information and Data Science. If you look at some of our competitors, their completion rate of their online degrees is maybe 30, 40%. So the fact that we have such a high completion rate shows what kind of dedication we have to those students and making sure that they succeed when they're being educated online. We also have a Master's of Information and Cybersecurity, which offers a holistic approach to cybersecurity. They develop an understanding in this program of information security technologies, as well as the economic, legal, behavioral, and ethical impacts of cybersecurity. The theme of adaptation and change leads well into my talk about Berkeley as a Bellwether, which I'll get to in just a moment. But first, let me briefly introduce the other speakers you'll hear from today, and to demonstrate how the iSchool responds to the grand challenges in the world we're facing. After I speak, you'll be hearing from Professor John Chuang, he's in the back there, you'll see him. We'll briefly introduce one of our newest research communities, IceBerk. John's research and teaching span the areas of climate informatics, biosensory computing, and incentive-centered design. He leads the Biosense Lab in studying brainwave authentication through past thoughts, effective biosensing, embodied decision-making, and fluency of ubiquitous sensing. He received his Ph.D. in engineering and public policy from Carnegie Mellon University, MS in electrical engineering from Stanford, and graduated summa cum laude in electrical engineering from the University of Southern California. John will be immediately followed by Ph.D. candidate Suraj Nair, who's also in the back, who will discuss one of IceBerk's first projects, Sand Mining Watch. Suraj's research interests lie at the intersection of development economics and machine learning, and his recent work uses novel data and methods to understand the socioeconomic consequences of environmental change, a topic that affects all of us every day. He's the recipient of the John L. Simpson Graduate Student Fellowship and the NSF Digital Transformation of Development Fellowship. He holds undergraduate and master's degrees in development studies from the Indian Institute of Technology in Madras. And we'll conclude with an interesting new talk presented by Michael Buckland, who will talk to us more about 1950 alumnus Robert Gitler from the class of 1931, who went to Japan with a vague mission to found the country's first college-level library school. A year ago, 2 trunks bought at a local yard sale were found to contain daily letters to his mother describing his experiences in Japan. Emeritus professor and former dean Michael Buckland will briefly talk about this find. We'll also do a longer presentation next week at the Friday afternoon seminar from 3 to 4 p.m. and you're more than welcome to attend that as well if you get your appetite whetted by today's talk. And then after the conclusion of the talk, we'll gather downstairs for a reception. I also want to note that we share today's Berkeley celebration with another Berkeley notable. Does anyone here know who's Berkeley being celebrated today? somebody else, I see a few grins. Oscar the Bear. For 83 years old today. His first appearance was in September 27th, 1941, which is today, and marks the end of using live bears at Cal sporting events. As I understand from doing a little bit of research, apparently even avoiding ethical issues, small bear cubs do tend to grow into large bears and become a little bit of a problem over time. And so Oscar the Bear doesn't have that problem. So we share a holiday today with Oscar. So before I hand over to the rest of the speakers, I want to use my prerogative as dean to say just a few words about one of the guiding principles that's shaping how I'm thinking about the next 106 years for the School of Information, by explaining one of the terms that I've been using as a guiding principle that I'll explain here in just a moment. So before I get on to that, I really like this picture because it helps me understand why we're called South Hall. Is because at the time South Hall was built, there were two halls, North Hall and South Hall. Because if you think about, when I first got here, I'm like, South Hall, how does that work? But the fact that there were only two buildings and North Hall no longer exists, it's been, I don't know when it was torn down, but and replaced by what's there today. But the fact that we're in one of the oldest, or the oldest building at the University of California, Berkeley, I think is an interesting thing to reflect on in terms of our next 106 years. So I want to talk a little bit about Berkeley as a bellwether, and I'll explain what I mean by that in just a moment. So again, my name is Suraj Nair. I'm Dean. I'm a Chancellor's Professor of Social Informatics here, and I'd be happy to talk more about my own research. But this is about the principles that I'm using to guide the way we're thinking about what comes next at the school. So I know we're going to talk about one of these today, the B, but this is something I shared with faculty and staff, some of my principles of how we run an organization. One is having an abundance mentality, the letter A. And again, I could talk at length about that, but it's about starting with yes to things. It doesn't mean everything's going to have a positive answer, but it means not starting with no. And thinking about the things that we're able to do, not focusing on the things we're not able to do. Next is Berkeley as a bellwether that I'll be talking about in some detail for just a few minutes. Connected, connectors, connecting is the C's. One of the things that I think is beautiful about a School of Information is that we are interdisciplinary in the true way of connecting people and wanting to connect to people and reach out and connecting to others. And so everything that we can do here as a school to build our connections, and you'll see this come up a little bit in my talk as well, is I think strengthens us as a school and strengthens our impact as a school on the way people think about the world. And then finally, the letter D, diversity and belonging matter. And this is one of the things that's important to me. It's been important in my career is how do we make sure that people not only are made to feel like they belong, but actually do belong in the communities that we build. Because that's one of the ways that information strengthens the world is by tapping into the skills and knowledge that everybody has and being able to bring their own unique viewpoints. So again, I'll focus today mostly on the B, but I'd be happy to talk about any of the others should anyone want to hear me go on about them. So Berkeley is a bellwether. So what's a bellwether? This is a picture of a bellwether. It's a sheep. In the strict sense of the word, the leading sheep of a flock with a bell on its neck. Some people misspell bellwether with an A, thinking it's W-E-A, it's weather, but it's not. It's W-E-T-H-E-R, which refers to a sheep, actually a castrated male sheep, but we'll leave that aside. But essentially, the bellwether is the sheep who leads the flock and has this bell on it so that the shepherd can help guide all of the rest of the flock to where it's going next. And you can see the second definition there from the Oxford languages, an indicator or predictor of something. And the things shared on Google right now is college campuses are often the bellwether of change. It's a handy coincidence that was part of the definition they provided. But it's how I want to think about the School of Information is, what are the areas that we can be the bellwether that everybody else is looking to say, what's Berkeley doing? We want to do more like that. And that's what I think we have an opportunity to do because Berkeley as a university is a bellwether. Berkeley is the kind of place, it's the top, well, UCLA and Berkeley go back and forth a little bit. Top-ranked public institution in the US, one of the top universities in the world. And for me, thinking about how we can continue to be a bellwether reflects some of the things that when I was talking earlier about the people I was meeting at lunch and that I shared a little bit of detail about, all of those are examples of bellwethers, people who saw a challenge in society, whether it was computerizing the records in libraries or looking at some of the challenges raised by new political circumstances in the world. People who saw those needs and said, I'm going to lead the charge to being able to deal with this in a better way, to use my skills as an information specialist, as an information professional, to lead the world into a better place. So this is what I want the School of Information to continue to grow in its space as a bellwether. And one of the things I would love to hear from any of you who are current students, some of you in the room, if you are a alumnus, I would love to hear from you things that you think the iSchool here at Berkeley either is or could or should be leading on, because that's one of the things that will help me understand how to lead a school, because it's not just what I think is important, it's what we collectively think are important and where we want to be going. So I like the idea of a bellwether because it's a little bit nerdy because, you have to know this definition of what a bellwether is. And that's kind of goofy with the secrets I like. But also this notion that we want everyone to be looking to us for the ideas of what comes next, I think is important and reflects what Berkeley as a university stands for. So I want to make Berkeley's oldest building the source of some of its newest ideas. And I share this partly because those of you who aren't sort of regularly engaged in this might not know a little bit about recent history. And I don't want to go into any depth about it, but I do want to tell you one thing, that announcement that you may not have heard. So one of the reasons I'm here is because there was some discussion over the last few years about merging the School of Information into a bigger unit. That discussion is over. We didn't hire me if that was still going to happen. So hiring me and coming up with that agreement that the School of Information would be a standalone unit is an important investment by the University of California at Berkeley in the field of information, in the School of Information, in our future as a bellwether that's going to change the world. But also a decision was made 2 weeks ago. There was another discussion going on about moving the School of Information out of this building into another building, which would have been newer, but also would have been a small unit in sharing a building with a much, much larger unit. And there are, of course, risks there with identity and everything else. And, this is sort of a quirky old building with very tall ceilings. I joke to people, so my office is just there. I've got 16-foot ceilings in my office, but the walls are 12 feet apart. So if I could turn the office on its side, it would actually be larger. So there's quirks to this, but the chancellor decided 2 weeks ago that the School of Information is staying here in South Hall. We'll be continuing to renovate the South Hall and to make it a vibrant place where the oldest building on campus will continue to be some of the sources of newest ideas here at the University of California at Berkeley. So that's, again, a great investment by the university of seeing how important the School of Information is and how important our independence is as a school. So how are we going to do this? I mentioned before about connectors. One of the ways is just by increasingly connecting across campus. Some of the things you're going to be hearing in just a minute are talking about climate issues, and climate issues extend beyond our school, right across the university. I was just having lunch yesterday with the dean of the College of Natural Sciences, and they're working on a lot of interesting things around climate that connects directly to what Professor Chuang and his students are doing. And so making more of these opportunities to connect out to units across campus. I've been at tons of interesting meetings in the last 7 weeks with things like the Berkeley Center for New Media, which is people interested in the way media is changing the world, which ties directly to what we do here at the school. With the D Lab, which is a methods lab about computational social science. All of these things that either are already partnering with the school or want to partner with the school. We're going to make more of those opportunities available so that we can become the true interdisciplinary space that people want to be their key partner in all of these interesting challenges that include an information aspect. Secondly, I think we need to reach out more across the state of California. We've got a unique role here as one of the best universities in a state with great universities. Berkeley and UCLA certainly lead the pack, but all of the UC system and the Cal State system are excellent universities. And I want the University of California, Berkeley School of Information to really be the place that people across California are saying, well, there's interesting stuff happening in misinformation, or the ways that we can organize information to keep our businesses going, the ways that we can train about understanding data science's impact on the world. I want them to be looking to us as their partners, whether they're in Sacramento and looking for partners to understand how government policy should be shaped, or whether they're in a company somewhere in the Bay Area or Central Valley. I really want us to partner more and more across the state and be the place that people are looking to for their new ideas. And then finally, globally. So we're an iSchool. We're part of the iSchool movement. We're one of the originators of the iSchool movement. And there's now 130 plus iSchools globally. And you can see, if you look at this, they're heavily concentrated in North America, Europe, and Asia. We're very well placed to continue to grow partnerships with these iSchools around the world, not only to give our students more opportunities, but also to give our faculty new opportunities for collaborative research with other iSchools, to think about how we can shape what this field of information is becoming. The field of information is actually at an interesting, I think, inflection point. So a number of us who are deans of schools of information have been talking about what does the next couple of decades at Schools of Information look like? We've just come through 20 or so years of the formation of the iSchools movement, and talking about what iSchools are all about. And we want to get past those definitional things and see what we aspire to be in the next couple of decades. So I'm working with Keith Barzullo, who's dean at Maryland, with Anand Day, who's dean at Washington, with deans at some other universities. We're trying to really map out what do we think that leading iSchools look like in the next couple of decades, and how do we make that happen collectively. So Berkeley being part of that Bellwether movement and shaping what information looks like over the next couple of decades. I don't know if that's telling me to shut up, but I'm done. So I'd be happy to take any questions and answers before I hand over to the next people, but I'm also going to be around all afternoon, so people can come up to me individually. So does anybody have a pressing question that they think the group would like to hear the answer to, or shall we move on to the next speakers? Yes.
You're very much in touch with the schools of information all around the country. Are they as, how should I put it? I don't want to say hostile, but are they so far from library studies?
It's different in different places. So at Texas, which I know best, obviously I was dean of Texas for 6 years, we still included libraries as an important part of our mission. We had about 30% of our master's students were studying for library degrees, we were ALA accredited. I've got a personal affinity for libraries and what libraries are able to do. One of the things that I did there was and got the first endowment for a chair in librarianship that was able to bring new people to the University of Texas. Other schools have moved completely more toward computational approaches. And I think computational approaches. And I think that's one of the things that the deans at Maryland, Washington, and I and others are thinking about is what are the range of models? There's not just one model for what a school of information is, but what are the range of models? And for me, I would love to see, I'm not going to say that we're going to reinstitute a library program here. It's been 30 plus years. That's not likely to happen. But I would like to see us engage more with multiple kinds of memory institutions, libraries, archives, museums, as one of the places that we engage with as a school of information. And, each school is slightly different. I can tell you, Illinois and North Carolina are still heavily invested in librarianship and library studies. Others are less so. It's been a series of decisions made over time that have gone in different directions. And I think that schools of information that have a big tent are the strongest going forward. Yes.
I have a question. What's the role of the School of Information take? What's a unique side about the School of Information compared to other schools that in the UC Berkeley?
So I think the biggest thing that makes a School of Information unique, the question is what makes a School of Information unique, is the connection between people and technology and understanding that both are important players in the ways we use information. So I've got a slide that I didn't bring today that I showed that explains my own area of social informatics. And I like to explain that in the socio-technical world, if we spell it with a hyphen, I study the hyphen, that connection between socio and technical. And I think that's a very nice place for School of Information to be, because it means we need to understand people and society and the ways that human beings work. But we also need to understand technology. And neither one can be an afterthought. I won't point your fingers, but there are some disciplines that they say, technology. Oh, and at the end, let's consider people a little bit. Or there's other places that say, people. Oh, and let's build a little technology to help them out. I think what makes schools of information unusual is that we're able to go into these kind of socio-technical settings and understand that both technology and the people and the role that information plays in connecting those together is unique and important in today's world because information is everywhere around us. So one last question, or shall I hand over to the next speaker? And like I said, you can grab me anytime this afternoon, but I've taken up too much time as it is. So let me hand over next to Professor Chuang.
Thank you, everyone. It's great to see all of you here. It's my great pleasure to be here today and share with you this new research and teaching initiative called IceBerk. As far as I know, for the first time since I've arrived here in Southall 25 years ago, that we've had any program focused on climate and informatics. I've not done the research, but maybe some of you here can help me with this, thinking beyond 25 years, going back maybe all the way 106 years, whether this is in fact the first time that we've had an organized effort around the issue of climate. And not a moment too soon, in my opinion. If you're not familiar with this area, this topic, maybe you think that I'm going to go to an online search engine and type in the words climate informatics. What you will find is that climate informatics refers to an academic community that tries to apply tools from statistics, probability, and now machine learning to the art of climate modeling. So it means that it is actually a community where the climate scientists are talking to the statisticians. I believe that climate informatics must be a lot broader than that. To begin with, to echo the point earlier, we want to quickly introduce people into the mix. By people, I mean all of us, you and I, because we and our children, our family are already and will continue to have to deal with the changes, the consequences of climate change. We're already experiencing it today. At the same time, you and I, the people, are also going to be the ones who will be tasked with tackling the root causes of climate change. So, adding people to climate and informatics, exactly something that the iSchool has been very good at since my arrival here. This is part of our DNA, that we don't only think about the technology or the information, but putting the people right in the middle. Your first reaction might be, oh, okay, how does putting people into the mix of climate and informatics help contribute to tackling the problems, right? At first thought, you may think that it will be our colleagues over in chemistry or physics or engineering. They're the ones who are going to be designing these new technologies for solar cells, storage, batteries, and carbon removal technologies. While that is all true and important, I think we also have to recognize that it is more than just simply coming up with technological solutions to this societal problem that we're facing. Right? If our challenge is to transition away from our legacy fossil fuel-based economy to a different system that is going to be more sustainable and more just, right? We need to go beyond thinking about just the atoms, also think about the bits, the information innovations that we need to come up with, right? To change people's minds, to tackle misinformation. Lots of opportunities that we as information scholars and information professionals can work on. I don't know if you're all familiar with this landmark study from 1972 called The Limits to Growth. It's more than 50 years now. The lead author of that report, Donella Meadows, she points to the importance of intervening at deep leverage points in the system. So if you're thinking about changing the system, overcoming its flaws, we need to think about interventions, but applied at the right places, the right leverage points. She lists a series of different points in which we can be effective in enacting change. One of the more important leverage points she refers to as information flows. So this is where we come in. Creating information flows where none exist today. What does new information flows enable? It enables transparency, accountability, and ultimately pressure on the decision makers, the stakeholders, to make changes to the system. This is a good introduction, a good motivation for Suraj's project that he'll be sharing with shortly. It's a perfect example of how we apply new technology to create a new information flow. Information flow that does not exist until now, that will hopefully result in very tangible change in the existing system. This project, by the way, is called Global Sand Mining Watch. Okay, that's our plan. More generally, I think the important point is that we want to empower people, and hence, the word empowerment in the name of our lab here. Empower people, especially those that are outside of the entrenched business interests and political interests, to by giving them the information that they need to enact change, right? The informatics for climate empowerment. So I have just one slide to share. This is just a screenshot of the homepage of IceBerk. And in particular, you see that I articulate 3 goals for IceBerk. Number 1, to understand the information needs and behaviors of individuals and communities confronting the effect of climate change. And then based on that, number 2, to develop information tools to support their efforts in climate mitigation, adaptation, and biodiversity conservation. And then thirdly, to train the next generation of information leaders for us to undertake the societal transition to a sustainable and just climate future. As part of this third goal, I'm currently this semester teaching a new course titled Climate People Informatics. Again, it's very intentional that I insert the word people right in the middle of climate and informatics. I see some of the students in the class actually here today. My hope through this class is to train a new generation of information professionals who will go out, join the tech industry, the climate tech industry, they will apply the iSchool skills that they learn here to understand information needs, to develop information tools, and bring this all back to the people and the communities, thereby closing the circle back to our first 2 goals. So to summarize, where do you all come in? Perhaps many of you are already engaging in some climate action, individually, as part of your household, as part of your neighborhood, your community. That's awesome. Perhaps some of you have connections they can share with me or our students, that you have connections with communities or organizations that we can partner with to work on projects. Perhaps some of you are thinking of supporting the school with a student scholarship or a endowed professorship, right? All of the above are different ways in which you can help us, launch IceBerk into a enterprise that I hope over a long period of time will provide impact on both the research and the educational side. And more generally, I hope that the topic of climate informatics, in fact, become a core area of strength, both for our school, the School of Information, and for other information schools globally, that we all recognize that there is an opportunity where we and our unique set of skills and expertise can, in fact, make a meaningful impact on this very important generational challenge of ours. So with that, thank you very much. I will. Suraj.
Cool. Hello, everyone. I'm Suraj. I'm a final year PhD student. I'm very excited to be here today to talk about some work we're doing at the iSchool about sand mining, and I'll tell you all about it in a second. I want to take a moment to welcome all the alumni back. Thank you for being here. This talk is designed to be very non-technical, so I promise a lot of pictures, no math, maybe one slightly engineering-looking diagram. But if people have questions about more technical things, I'm around. I'm happy to chat about it at the end of the talk. And I'm excited to hear about what you think. So let me start. Despite how little we think about sand, it turns out that it is the second most extracted resource in the world. it's not really an overstatement to say that sand is perhaps one of the most important pillars of modern life. It goes into pretty much everything around us. Construction, asphalt, concrete for construction, asphalt for laying roads, reclamation, and sand also goes into a bunch of other daily items, glass, computer chips, all of these things essentially use sand, right? And so anywhere in the world where there's a rapid expansion in economic growth, where there's an infrastructure boom, you're going to see this massive increase in demand for sand. I really like this figure to put things into context. We are at a point in time where the global demand for sand is skyrocketing at a rate we've never really seen before. This pyramid on the right, the small one, represents sort of the amount of sand that has been consumed by the US over the last century. The US in the last century has poured about 3 billion tons of concrete, give or take, and concrete is 75% sand, right? The other pyramid on the left represents the amount of sand that's been consumed by China in the last 10 years, right? That's about 3 times what the US used over a century. And India, which is where perhaps the biggest infrastructure boom is happening, is going to exceed that in the next 20 years. So it's really not an understatement to say that the global demand for sand is going through the roof. And some of you might ask why this is a problem. We just have so much sand all around us. There's sand in the desert, there's sand on our beaches, there's sand everywhere. But the thing is, construction grade sand actually has some very specific requirements. It has to be of a certain coarseness. It has to be of a certain grain size, which allows it to bind asphalt or concrete. And unfortunately, most of such sand is really found in rivers, lakes, and beaches across the world. So these are pictures we took on field visits in India, and these are pretty much scenes you will see in any emerging economy around the world, where people with buckets, shovels, trucks on the left, and boats, and maybe mechanized excavators on the right, are removing sand, are extracting sand from our rivers and lakes all day, every day, and this has been going on for decades, right? So why is this a problem? Well, you know that rivers are sensitive ecosystems, and as you can imagine, extracting sand from rivers at an unsustainable rate has a bunch of consequences. Around the world, we've sort of seen that excessive sand mining can hasten erosion and flooding, reducing the resilience of ecosystems to climate change. It can increase groundwater pollution. It makes groundwater more saline. And it generally has a bunch of devastating consequences for the local environment and biodiversity. And these are not really speculative. We've seen all of this before. And this is my chance to talk about, oops, I'm missing a slide. No. Okay, doesn't matter. Yeah, this is my chance anyway to talk about how some of these impacts have already been felt, especially here in the US, which has a long history of sand mining. Some of you have been in the Bay for much longer than I have, and you might be aware that the Kaiser Permanente, the family that runs the Kaiser Permanente hospitals, before they started in the healthcare industry, they were essentially sand mining barons in the Bay. So even today, the Permanente quarry is around in Santa Clara. One of the last sand mining facilities in the US was on the coast of the Monterey, at the mouth of the Salinas River. And that mine single-handedly is expected to have doubled coastal erosion along the California coast in that section. So these impacts are real. We're seeing these impacts, and we know that this is a terrible problem. So what can we do about it, right? You might have seen articles like this in popular media, which talk about how this is a global crisis at a scale that is perhaps never before seen, even though we really don't think about it very much. And at the heart of it is an information and a data challenge, right? We know that the demand for sand is expected to double in the next few years. Most of this sand is going to come from settings where regulation is scarce, monitoring and enforcement is very limited, and illegal mining is pretty rampant. And all of this has resulted in really a very critical data problem where we know very, very little about where the mining is happening, what the scale is, what the extent is. And in 2019, the United Nations put out this report, which I think really sort of hammers at the heart of the general sustainability challenge, which is that it is a basic information challenge. We need information about where sand is being extracted, what the impacts of sand mining are, and how it's being used. And all of this data needs to be available to policymakers in real time. so that they can respond to these challenges as and when they manifest. And this really is sort of the issue or the challenge that we've been trying to work on. Over the last year or so, we've been trying to build open source tools that allow us to detect and monitor sand mines. We've been primarily relying on publicly available satellite imagery and a bunch of machine learning algorithms, which allow us to say a little bit about where these sand mines are located and what the extent of mining is. What are some of the immediate goals of this project? Like I said, we're focusing on India for the time being. So we really want to understand the scale and extent of mining there. We're trying to build tools that enable near real-time monitoring of illegal mining, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. And once this data set is ready, we can then think about answering a far more important question. What are the social and economic consequences of being located close to a sand mine? The other thing we're also very excited about is that we're working with a local organization in India that is primarily trying to maintain river ecosystems and river health. And we have been all of the tools we're building are essentially going to live in an open data portal that this organization is putting together. So the idea is that people in the communities who want to learn more about sand mining, who might want to use this information to enable other forms of action, have access to it. And a portion of this data portal is already live, and we'll be adding more things there soon. So, given all of that, what is it that we actually do? Well, all of our tools rely on a very simple basic idea, which is that sand mines have very distinct visual characteristics. If you take a picture from space, if you take a satellite image, it's very, very easy actually to spot sand mines. So here, is this the pointer? No, well, no pointer. So here, if you look at these picture on the left, you'll see a bunch of pits and you'll see a bunch of scarring patterns, which look like trenches. Those are very characteristic of sand mines. And the figure on the right suggests the same thing. And so as long as you know what you're looking for, it is in theory possible to train a bunch of machine learning models to detect these patterns. The challenge is it's not that straightforward. Sand mines move around a lot in space. This animation on the left is simply displaying how a single sand mine changes in shape, size over the course of an 18-month period. And this is in a river in India. So what's happening is the mine starts, you can see the trenches and the pits growing. And then the monsoon comes, it brings with it fresh sediment, it washes the whole thing away, and then the whole cycle repeats. So we know where the mines roughly are, but they're changing in real time. And this is a little bit of a challenge for us to handle. And that's something some of the machine learning tools we've built are very good at doing. The other thing that obviously helps us is the fact that we have perhaps more satellite imagery available publicly freely than ever before in history. In the image on the right, the top panel simply shows you what we can see in the visible portion of the spectrum. But because of freely available satellite imagery, we also have access to information that captures various other parts of the electromagnetic spectrum. And this is really useful because it allows us to separate sand from water and sand from vegetation and a bunch of other things. So the availability of a huge amount of satellite imagery really makes our life a little easier, though still there's a lot of work to be done on the machine learning front. What is the other thing we need then to make all of this work? Over the last year, we've been putting together this high-quality data set of ground truth labels. This is information that we are annotating in real time, where we're saying that this is exactly what a mine looks like in this part of the world. And this is essentially what we use to teach these machine learning models, that these are the patterns you want to detect. And then we can scale this up across the whole country and across the whole world. And this is really the slowest part of all of this. I have spent several months in the basement here staring at these pictures. So I'm pretty glad that this data set is coming together nicely. And so when we put all of that together, what we really then are able to do is feed in a bunch of satellite images into our machine learning pipelines. And what comes out is a prediction or a score telling us whether a given pixel in this image is a sand mine or not. And I'll show you a little bit about what all of this looks like. So in order to contextualize things, I'm going to show you a bunch of results and early findings from a portion of India. This is the Ganga Basin, where about 500 million people, give or take, live. There are about 50 big rivers here, and it is home to maybe about a quarter of India's water resources. So this is an incredibly important region for the country and perhaps the world. And any sort of fluctuation in the quality of these ecosystems is going to have a number of social and economic consequences. So this is where we've started building and piloting our tools. And what our models do is they spit out for a given point in time a map that looks something like this, where the areas in red are essentially areas where we think there's a sand mine. And so in this figure, you can sort of see that there are 2 or 3 big patches of red on the river, which suggests that it's highly likely that there's a sand mine there. And what we then do is take some of the data we already have and try to validate these model outputs. This figure is actually really fun because some of our colleagues from India took a boat and went down this river, and they took pictures of the mine as they were going down the river. That's all the crosses. And so data like that really helps us identify and say something about how well our models are doing. In general, across these 48 rivers, we're able to correctly identify about 75% of the pixels that are actually labeled as a sand mine, which is a reasonable baseline. And we're doing a bunch of things to improve the model performance as well. But all of this is to say that given these ingredients, a bunch of satellite imagery, a bunch of labels, and these machine learning tools we have built, we get a really good first pass approximation of where these mines are located in space across time. And that's really powerful. What does this do? Well, this allows us to capture the seasonality in mining. You remember the patterns I showed you where there's a bunch of mines, then the water comes, takes it all away, and then the whole thing restarts. We can pick up that pattern pretty well. So that's a good sign that our models are doing something right. We seem to be able to pick up temporal changes in mines really well. Here's a site in 2020 and then again in 2021. And I've sort of mapped out where the mines are in these sites with the red circles, right? And here's what the model says is sort of the mine itself. So we're doing pretty well for this kind of thing. We're able to say that, hey, here's a mine and here's how this mine changes over time. And that's useful and powerful for a lot of reasons, because we can then start thinking about how much sand is being extracted from a mine if you have the area down correctly. So that's something we're excited to do. The last thing we can do is look at how the sort of spatial geography of sand mining compares to areas where legal mining is allowed to happen, right? So in this figure, what we're really doing is the stuff in yellow, those polygons in yellow are areas where the government has allowed sand mining to happen. These are small legal mining concessions. Here's where how much mining is actually happening, right? So if you go back to this image, you can see those characteristic scarring patterns all over the place, because this is a site where mining is kind of really bad. And again, our tools do really well in picking up this kind of thing. So we have a first pass approximation for a really decent detector in terms of finding out where the sand mines are. What can we do with this information? One thing we really want to do, as I mentioned, is characterize illegality really well. So where is illegal mining happening, right? This is a picture we took on a field visit where this is a protected wildlife area where no mining is supposed to happen. But as you can tell, there's a big sand mine here. And the funny thing about this image, about this mine, is that it's located right at the doorstep of the village office. So it's happening with the knowledge of the local politicians and the contractors. There's a large political economy related to mining. And that's part of the reason why regulation is really scarce. But what we can do is take all of these predictions for these areas in the national parks and then say something about how much mining is happening in these protected wildlife areas. The second thing we can do is think about how much mining is occurring near critical infrastructure. It seems to be over the past 5 years that bridge collapses have become a really common thing in many parts of India. And the fact that people are digging out sand from riverbanks is supposed to, at least in theory, make that situation worse. Once again, we can take maps like this and then see how much mining is happening in the proximity to these bridges, which is another sort of dimension along which we can characterize illegality. According to Indian law, you're not supposed to mine within 500 meters of a bridge. So we can actually characterize that really well and have a useful data set about that. So all of that is to really say that we're putting together a bunch of tools that leverage publicly freely available satellite imagery and machine learning models, which enable us to detect sand mining. In doing so, we're plugging a key data gap, which I think sort of links back to this point about the sustainability challenge being an information and a data challenge primarily. Our early results, like I showed you, are pretty much in line with what the anecdotal evidence from the region is. It suggests that sand mining is really prevalent in this part of the world. In fact, in the area we were looking at, we find sand mines in all of the provinces in that region. We find sand mining in about 75% of those counties or the districts in that region, and in 40 out of those 48 rivers. If we look at the national parks and the wildlife reserves in that region, we find the existence of mining in about a third of those national parks and reserves, which is really problematic. And we counted maybe 400 bridges in this region. We find mining within a 500-meter buffer of about 5% of all of these bridges. So these tools enable us to say something about where sand mining is occurring. It allows us to characterize where illegal mining is happening to some extent. And what we're working on in the background is to answer these larger questions about what happens when you're located close to a sand mine. So there's about 14,000 villages in this region located right next to these mines. We're working on trying to see, are there like health implications? Are there pollution implications? What happens to the groundwater? So those are the kinds of things we're doing. And I think that's pretty much all I had to show you today. I just wanted to take a second to thank Ando and Josh, who are my colleagues on the project, and our colleagues from India, who've really helped us put this all together. And yeah, thank you once again for having me.
Any quick questions?
Yes.
What about the larger particles, gravel?
Yeah, great question. We think our current model is not going to do super well to detect gravel mines. We're building a separate pipeline to do that. That's mostly because of the geography here. So in this region, like the bottom half is essentially the plains and the top half is the rivers. And we don't currently have a lot of training data that characterizes gravel mines. So we don't think the current model is going to do well for that. But we're working on solving that and setting up a separate pipeline which can do that. It is less prevalent than sand mining in this part of the world, though, but still there. Yes.
All of the work you've done is very descriptive and analytical about what is happening.
Yes.
What about recommendations as to what should be done?
Yeah, it's a great point. I think that's on the way in terms of putting together. One thing we've been trying to do in India is work with our partners there to see if there's appetite from local politicians and local law firms, local enforcement agencies, if they're interested in using something like this. And it's not as easy as saying that, hey, you should stop sand mining, because it's a key driver of economic growth. So the right policy seems to be something that's going to balance extraction with the local needs. And we have a bunch of ideas on how to set those up. We're trying to see if there's appetite from the other side to engage.
What are the implications of the enormous pyramid you showed for China and everybody else?
Well, in terms of sand mining, it really just means that you're going to see a lot more of this situation where the riverbed is just stripped bare. This is already happening in China, where there are certain lakes and parts of China that are being really ravaged by the problem, and there's not much happening to solve it. It is lucrative. I think
if the riverbeds and I guess lakes, whatever, but if the water's going, what are the people in the community going to drink?
Yeah, it is a problem. Basically, the groundwater table goes down. There's less water to drink. It places enormous strain on the resources. But again, I think the flip side of it is, at least in our field visits, this is an incredibly lucrative industry. You can work in this industry and make 5 to 6 times the money you will as a miner relative to other job opportunities. So people are still participating, and we don't fully understand the implications for local development yet. But there's both of these things happening at the same time, where there's this effect on agriculture, groundwater, all of these things that makes life worse potentially for a lot of people living in these areas. But at the same time, a lot of people are making money off it. So it's a hard thing to pin down.
Is this going to be like with fossil fuels? Everybody knows it's bad and it's ruining the environment and it has terrible implications, but we can't stop the people?
At least right now in India, it seems to be a little bit that way. But I hope we see some sense.
I wish you the best.
Thank you.
One more
There was
question.
one.
Yeah, just quickly, that was fascinating.
Thank you.
I wondered if you were able to use any tools or techniques that have been developed for finding other kinds of mines, like open pit mines, or if not, whether what you're doing can be adapted to other.
Yeah, the reason, that's where we started. The reason those tools don't work as well is because of this issue. Like, so there's a large, I think, body of work that's been done to say detect gold mines in the Amazon and in sub-Saharan Africa. The thing about those settings is the mines are very stable. Once there's a pit, it might get flooded with water, but the infrastructure stays constant. The mine itself is located at the same place. Here, the thing is moving around a fair bit. So they might do a first order approximation reasonably well, but it's going to miss out a lot of much smaller mines, and it's going to miss out all of this temporal variation. Those tools are not meant to handle this. So that's why we had to do our own thing.
Thank you. Please, talk about that. Down arrow goes.
Oh, down, wrong way. About a year ago, a retired lawyer living in San Leandro was enjoying his hobby of treasure hunting in yard sales. And at the yard sale, he bought 2 trunks. Then he found that the trunks had a lot of letters in them. And he found that the letters had to do with, were all from Japan. And he was interested in Japan, so he started to read the letters. And then he realized they were all from the same person, Robert Gitler, to his mother. There's 900, over 900 of them. Now, the bottom right, that's a lady who was a Southern belle, Frances Burnett, of a very artistic nature. The family was moved to New York City, where she was put in an arranged marriage with a Russian immigrant who dealt with furs. This didn't suit her at all well, but she became pregnant. So as soon as baby Robert was old enough, she was divorced. She took baby Robert and her parrot on the train to San Francisco to start over. It appears she fancied a theatrical role on the stage. That didn't work out. Her artistic expression was in designing hats. She was a milliner. She did other things, including managing the Bluebell Cafe, which used to be on Bangkok. They moved to Oakland, which Oakland had amongst the best public schools in the country back then. So baby Robert grew up. He got a bachelor's degree in history and political science here on campus. And then he didn't know what to do. He wanted to go into the Foreign Service, but got ill and missed the exams. And he got a job, meanwhile, as a student assistant in the library, where he met Sidney Mitchell, the founder of this school. Sidney Mitchell influenced him to take up librarianship and encouraged him to come to this school, where he got his certificate in librarianship in 1931. That is the direct ancestor of the present Master of Information Management and System. Now, unfortunately, William Murray died a few months ago, but in the meanwhile, his wife had started Googling to try to find out more. She didn't find anything on Frances Burnett Gitler, but she did find a web page about Robert Gitler, on my website. Now, why was there anything on my website? Well, the explanation is that 30 years ago in the school, a student called Linda Absher decided that what the world needed was for her to do a term paper on the development of public libraries in Japan. That's the good news. The bad news is she couldn't find any material in English. So she asked me what to do, and I said, go to talk to old man Gitler in San Francisco, because he was there for a long time. Talk to him. So she went to talk to him and freaked out with excitement because he explained not only had he started the first college-level library school in Japan, but the true story had never been told. He was a sort of motor mouth, so I rather doubt that. But anyway, that's what he told her. And she instantly wanted to do an oral history to capture this tale because Mr. Gitler was getting old. I said, no, you've got to graduate. But I promised we compromised. I would get a grant, and then she could do it. I got a grant, but by this time, she graduated and left the state. This was a little awkward for me. I had a grant and nobody to do the work, and I didn't know anybody who would want to do the work. It got worse. I felt that, imagine the dilemma. If this was the biggest thing to have happened in Japanese librarianship since ever, and the story hadn't been told, that was a big deal. But if it wasn't really true that it had never been told, it's not a big deal. And I had other fish to fry, ethical dilemma. So I felt obliged to do it. So I got a tape recorder, and I would go. I couldn't find him. He was lost. I tracked him down to a senior citizens facility in Oakland and got him to talk. There he is. This went on for years. And eventually, it had to be edited, and it came out in a rather handsome little volume there in 1999. But I had my doubts. Where was the rest of the story? Because this was very improbable. And think about it. Japan had the most reactionary traditional universities in the world, probably. He didn't know anything about Japan. He didn't know Japanese. His mandate was to go to Japan, start a library school in the topic that was not regarded as suitable for universities, find a university who'd take him on, develop a curriculum, get a faculty, recruit students, make sure the facilities were there. He had 3 months. He did it a week later. He imported American faculty, mostly, who didn't know Japanese, and got translators. Nothing was going to stop this. But he didn't have enough time. He didn't have enough money. How could this have happened? I felt there must be more to it. So after this came out, intermittently, I would sort of take time out and start digging and poking to see what happened. One of the people who went with him kept a scrapbook and copies of letters and lent them to me on the grounds I was going to write an article. 10 years later, she wanted it back, and where was the article? So after more than 20 years, I came up with my account, which was half of this book, which was positioned as a discussion of the relationship between libraries and society. That was in 2021. The problem had been lack of contemporary evidence, and now we had all these letters. So that was why that was of interest to me. Now, one of the things that comes out in the letters don't change the story, but it adds details. One of the things that was crucially important was the actual faculty in the first year that were imported. Ed Larson, the second from the left, did know a little Japanese, and that's as far as it went. The point is that a professional school in isolation is meaningless. You could go and start an academic department, but you can't go and start a professional school unless you're engaged with the profession. There has to be a dynamic between the professional school and the profession. And the profession has to be engaged in the wider society. What that really meant, and this is what Gitler understood, he not only had to start an academic program, he had to engage with the library profession in Japan and change it. He had to engage in the attitude of librarians and library law legislation in Japan. It's not a small task. It meant that the faculty let themselves in for far more than teaching. He made them give out their home telephone numbers and address. He required them to be always accessible. He made them give free institutes the length and breadth of Japan, especially on the reference service, which was a new idea there, and the idea of outreach and public relations, all new in the situation. He really worked them, and he handpicked those people because he'd been greatly influenced by Sidney Mitchell. There was no father in his life, and Sidney Mitchell was a father figure for him, as for a number of other early students. And Sidney Mitchell was very clear on the importance of professional associations being engaged with your profession and the relationship between libraries and society. He understood that at some level. They had to work through translators and interpreters.
Michael, what's the date on the photo?
What?
What's the date on the photo?
1951. And never missed an opportunity for anything. We heard that Eleanor Roosevelt was going to have a visit to Japan. Right, we must get her to the library school. How? Well, her trip was organized by a little committee chaired by Professor Matsumoto. So he went to his go-to person at Keio University and said, we must do this. But the person he went to had a personal feud with Matsumoto and refused to have anything to do with it. So it happened that Gitler knew a librarian on the planning committee and went to him. And he got the wife of the man who wouldn't respond to go and talk to Matsumoto's aunt. So Matsumoto got pressure from two sides to arrange for Eleanor Roosevelt to go and visit Robert Gitler's Japan Library School. It wasn't a visit to the university, it was specifically to the library school. And there she is. He was so proud of that. He's standing next to her. Now, for 30 years, Eleanor Roosevelt had a syndicated column, My Day. And when I went to look, when I knew the exact date, there's a little quote from her syndicated column about her visit. He, as I say, he never missed an opportunity to do anything. And he loved parties and social events. They were always having parties at the school. One year, the students created masks of the faculty. And amongst the letters was this mask of Robert Gitler. It's rather lifelike, actually. And then if anybody was coming or anybody was leaving, party time. Now, you can imagine that the Japanese library profession was a bit ambivalent about occupation people coming in and telling them how to do their business. And while the more enlightened librarians were rather knowledgeable about American developments, which were so different from the situation in Japan, and welcomed it, on the whole, they didn't like it. And there was some strong negative feelings, shall we say. Well, in the month after the school started, the Japan Library Association had its annual meeting in Tokyo on home turf. So he racked his brain, what should we do? He learned that it would be that the faculty and himself would be invited and that they would be recognized at some point. So he thought he should prepare a few remarks. But he looked at his remarks and he felt this isn't good enough. Because in the Japanese context, the remarks would be exceedingly flowery and poetical. So he wrote some poetical and flowery remarks, and he said that in English, and it looked rather silly. So the afternoon before the event, he had a brainwave. He assembled the translators of the school and said, translate this into Japanese. I'm going to do it in Japanese. They were sort of horrified by this, but they did as he said, and they made a very elegant rendering in exquisite Japanese. And amongst his other duties, overnight, he partly memorized it and he partly had a Roman script version with marks for emphasis. And then at the event, he confused everybody by saying, I apologize, I don't know Japanese, and then launched into this exquisite Japanese theme. After the event, that went over well. After the event, there was a reception with much drinking of sake. And he was at the sort of high table, well, squatting as a guest of honor with the deputy director of the National Diet Library. And they all had their cups and their jugs of sake. And I don't know how much he knew ahead of time, but he understood that there was a protocol in social gatherings where men are drinking sake. And you don't, if you can avoid it, actually pour the sake into your cup, because it's the job of somebody less senior or junior to pour it into your cup. The other way around, if somebody senior came and poured it into a junior person, well, that was quite remarkable. That would be an astonishing social gesture. Now, he noticed out of the corner of his eye that one of the most vociferous critics of his school, who thought it was such a bad idea, was just sort of down one of the rows. So he got up with his jug and he went over and he poured sake into this guy's cup. The guy was astonished, stood up and poured some of his jug into Gitler's cup. And by the end of the evening, they were all blind drunk, and this guy was one of the most strongest supporters of the school after that. That's the way they operate. The papers are interesting because they reveal not only such details, which were not in here, but also his relationship with people. And one of the more interesting things was his relationship to a man called Don Brown. It was Don Brown's idea to start a library school. The SCAP, the occupation organization, had a civil information and education branch. And he was responsible, Don Brown was in charge of the civil information. He was the censor for Japan. He was a very private, elusive, mysterious guy. And when Gitler was assigned to him, or vice versa, Gitler didn't take to him. In the letters, there's a rather snide comment about him, but he said to his mother, well, we'll have to try to work it out. But gradually that changed, and by the end of his time in Japan, Don Brown was the go-to person for Gitler. If he had a problem or worry, he'd seek out Don Brown and have dinner and they'd talk, and he was his best advisor. Harry Bauer, the director of the University of Washington Libraries, was another counselor. Gitler had been director of the University of Washington Library School before going to Japan. And Francis Cheney, a faculty member of the Peabody College in Nashville, was another. Now, this is just an extended trailer for my talk next Friday. When I cover the papers, I kind of write up an article about what I found, what I thought was interesting. And then the deal with Catherine Murray is that the papers will go to Keio University, where they're eagerly waiting for them. Now, we're celebrating the 106th anniversary. But as a little bonus extra, this is the 50th anniversary of the Wheeler Report. The Wheeler Report was the report by the campus review of a school on what's the future of the school. And the Wheeler Report, 1974, said training librarians, good librarians to work in libraries is a very good thing, but actually there's an even greater need outside of libraries for the marking and the parking of documents and data for folks to use. So the school should expand, not away from libraries, but outside and more inclusive. And that actually was the pivotal strategic turn for the school from a library school to library plus. That Wheeler committee had one outside member from the community. The outside member's name was Robert Gitler. So come back next Friday, 107, and you'll get a longer version. Thank you.
Questions?
I recognize one woman in that picture. That's why I asked you about the date. Bertha Frick
Yes,
was a major figure in American libraries.
the law work.
Okay, I think she had something to do with children's subject headings for H.W. Wilson. You go, yeah, she's on the right there.
Yes, the one nearest me.
Yes.
He had devoted enormous time to the American Library Association, the California Library Association, and he really knew what was going on and who was who. And he was very, very careful about who he would pick. He didn't want people who wanted a holiday in Japan. And more importantly, he wanted somebody who would have a good, healthy attitude for the people in Japan. And they came for a year and then left. And he brought another group. The successive years were not quite as effective as this. If he hadn't got these people, Bertha Frick, Francis Chaney, Ed Larson, Phyllis Taylor, it might not have worked. And this comes through in the letters very, very clearly. The catch was, for him, that he had taken a year's leave from his job as head of the library school at the University of Washington. And it was, he extended it to 18 months. And then the occupation ended with the peace treaty. That meant that funding was going to be cut off and his grant would be over. At the last minute, the Rockefeller Foundation, which had decided as a matter of policy, they'd done libraries, they'd do other things, nevertheless agreed to fund the school, but they wanted some continuity. If all the Americans left, there wouldn't be enough to survive in an old-fashioned reactionary school, even though this was the most enlightened university. None of the others were able or willing to stay, so he had to. And that cost him his job at Washington, and he never got vested in their retirement scheme and so on. So he sort of paid a personal price. But at the end of his period there, he felt this was like a whole career in 5 years and was immensely proud of what had happened, with reason.
His whole skein was 5 years. His whole time there was 5 years.
It was, 5 years.
Wow.
And a letter almost every day to Ma.
One more question?
Is their library still open?
Is their library school still running?
School.
It's one of the top 2 schools of information in Japan. Keio University, the Stanford of Japan. And I was greatly helped in this on step. His memoirs were entirely from memory. and he was so shaky he couldn't write. And it needed a lot of editing, and I needed a lot of help on spelling Japanese names. And I was helped by a man called Masaya Takayama, my doppelganger, but on the same day, the same year, with a similar career. Except that when he retired, he was put in charge of the National Archives. That had nothing to do. And we had a visiting scholar. He came here as a visiting scholar. That's how I got to know him. And then later, a visiting scholar called Professor Kishida, he helped with the Japanese script in the bibliography. And both of them are going to participate next Friday remotely. And it occurred to me this morning that one of the things that's not obvious about really good schools of information is that I have benefited enormously from visiting professors, especially from abroad. They cost nothing, they pay an arm and a leg now to come. But I have benefited greatly from the role of visiting professors. This is an example. And so with this, I got enough help from Professor Takayama that I added his name with the assistance of. Anyway, thank you for celebrating with us. Oh, this is your line, isn't it?
So we've seen this afternoon some great examples of Bellwethers, both who've been part of the school and have been inspired by the school. So I think this has been a really good opportunity to reflect on that. I'm afraid we don't have any sake downstairs for the party, but we do have cupcakes and drinks. So I invite you to go downstairs and chat with each other, chat with anybody who's speaking today, make an opportunity to celebrate the school, and happy 106th anniversary, 106th birthday to everybody who's been involved in the School of Information over the years. Just thank you very much for coming today.